The morning Ryo Hashimoto was buried, the sky did not cry, the clouds did not gather. The sun came out bright and warm, almost cheerful, as if it did not know that the most gentle, most loving person in Kai Hashimoto's entire world had just been lowered into the cold, quiet ground. Kai stood at the edge of the grave, still in his dark mourning clothes, his hands pressed together so tightly his knuckles had gone pale. He was not crying. He had already cried every tear his body could make in the 3 weeks that Ryo had been sick. He had cried in the hospital bathroom, in the stairwell, in the parking lot, and in the little kitchen of the apartment they shared, the one where Ryo used to make sweet red bean porridge every Sunday morning and hum old songs while the steam curled up to the ceiling. Now that kitchen was silent. Now that apartment was empty. And now, standing here in front of a polished stone that had Ryo's name carved into it, Kai felt like something inside him had gone quiet too. Not peaceful quiet, but the kind of quiet that comes after something very loud suddenly stops. Ryo was 26 years old. They had been together for 4 years and married for 1. 1 year. 12 months. Not nearly enough. Ryo had been the one who always talked too much. Ryo had been the one who remembered everyone's birthdays, who picked up stray cats and found them homes, who stayed up late making handmade cards when his friends were sad. He had laughed easily, loved freely, and made everyone around him feel like they were exactly where they were supposed to be. Kai had been the quiet one, the one who did not know how to say the right thing, who forgot to text back, who showed love by being present rather than by speaking. Ryo used to tease him about it. "You love me like a tree loves the sun," Ryo had said once, laughing softly, silent but always leaning toward me. Kai had not known what to say back then. He still did not know now. What he did know was this: the illness had come fast, faster than the doctors had expected. Ryo had not wanted to tell him at first, had hidden the medication, had kept smiling. By the time Kai found out how serious it was, there were only 3 months left. 3 months. Kai had used every single day. He had taken a leave from work. He had learned how to make red bean porridge, even though it never tasted quite right. He had held Ryo's hand every night. And in those last weeks, when Ryo could barely keep his eyes open, he had whispered things into Kai's ear, quiet, careful things that Kai did not fully understand at the time. "Be good to yourself, Kai," Ryo had said, "even when things get hard. Even when people come along who don't deserve your kindness, be good to yourself anyway." At the time, Kai had thought it was just the gentle rambling of a tired person. Now, standing at this grave, he wondered if Ryo had known something that he hadn't. The Hashimoto family was powerful, old money, old rules, and even at a funeral they made their power known. Kai had married into this family and had always felt like he was standing slightly outside of it, watching through glass. He was not from a wealthy family. He was not cold or sharp or calculated the way the Hashimotos were. He was just Kai, a junior illustrator at a small publishing company with a love of rainy afternoons and second-hand books. Ryo had not been like his family. That is why Kai had loved him. But now Ryo was gone, and the family remained. It was after the burial, at the family estate, that Kai first understood exactly how much trouble he was in. The family lawyer stood in the grand sitting room with a folder open, reading carefully, and as the words came out, Kai felt the floor tilt beneath him. Ryo had left the estate and a portion of the family legacy to Kai, but there was a condition, a clause that Ryo, or perhaps the family, had buried deep in the legal documents. The Hashimoto bloodline had to continue. Kai stared at the lawyer. "I don't understand," he said quietly.
It was then that he felt it, that particular weight of someone looking at him. He turned his head. Standing near the window, arms folded, face unreadable, was Sora Hashimoto, Ryo's older brother. 30 years old, tall, with eyes the same shade as his late brother's, but none of the warmth. He had been like a winter version of Ryo, same features, entirely different feeling. Where Ryo was sunlight, Sora was shade. Sora had never liked Kai, or perhaps more accurately, Sora had never bothered to feel anything about Kai at all. He was the kind of person who looked through people rather than at them. In all the years Kai had been with Ryo, he could count the conversations he'd had with Sora on one hand. The family has agreed, the lawyer said carefully, that in order to honor the terms of the will, Sora Hashimoto will move into the estate alongside Kai to assist in managing the bloodline continuation arrangements. The room was very quiet. Kai looked at the lawyer. Sora looked at Kai with those cool, unreadable eyes. "This is not what I would have chosen," Sora said. His voice was low, even. No anger, no warmth, just fact. "I will honor my brother's wishes." Kai wanted to say 100 things. He wanted to say that this felt wrong, that Ryo would never have wanted this, that he needed time, that his heart was still sitting next to a grave 2 miles away, and he was just the body walking around without it. Instead, he pressed his lips together and looked out the window. The sun was still shining. It still didn't seem to know that everything had changed.
Sora moved into the east wing of the estate exactly 3 days after the funeral. He brought very little, a few suitcases, a large number of books, and the kind of silence that seems to fill every room it enters. Kai had grown up in a small, noisy apartment with 2 younger siblings and parents who always had something to say. He was used to sound. He was used to clutter and warmth and the feeling of other people nearby. Even when he and Ryo had needed quiet, it had been a comfortable quiet, the kind 2 people make together when they already understand each other. The quiet that Sora brought was a different kind entirely. It pressed against the walls. It followed Kai down the hallways. It sat at the breakfast table like a third person who was not welcome but refused to leave. The first week they barely spoke. Sora ate at 7 in the morning and 7 in the evening, like a schedule printed on paper and followed without question. He answered Kai's attempts at conversation with single words. He read in the library for hours. He worked in the study with the door half closed. He moved through the estate like a ghost who was not haunting it, just passing through. Kai told himself it was fine. He told himself he didn't need conversation. He had work to do. His illustrations, his deadlines, his quiet life that he was trying to carefully rebuild from the pieces Ryo's leaving had scattered. But things were not fine, and Kai was starting to understand why. It started small, little things that didn't quite sit right. Kai noticed that the family lawyers were calling more than they should have been. He noticed that Sora spent long stretches of time on the phone, voice low and clipped, clearly not wanting to be heard. He noticed that some of the estate staff seemed uncomfortable around him, a certain nervousness, a certain way of looking away too quickly. Then, one evening, while looking for a book he had lent Ryo months ago, Kai found himself in the part of the study he didn't usually enter. There was a drawer left slightly open. Inside, he found a folder. He almost didn't look, almost. The papers inside were not complicated. They were in fact very simple. A set of arrangements, stamped and signed, between members of the Hashimoto Family Council and a legal firm. Arrangements that had been made not after Ryo died, but before, weeks before. Kai read slowly. His hands stayed very still on the paper. It seemed that the bloodline clause in the will had not come from Ryo at all.
Rio had originally written a different will, a simpler one that gave Kai full rights without conditions. But at some point during those final weeks, when Rio had been too tired and too sick to manage everything himself, the family had stepped in. The lawyers had presented a new version, and someone had convinced Rio, or had managed the signing in a way that left questions, and the original will had been quietly replaced. The someone whose signature was on the communication letters? Sora Hashimoto. Kai set the papers down. He walked to the window. He looked out at the garden where Rio used to sit in the mornings with his tea. He had thought grief was the heaviest thing a person could carry. He had been wrong. Grief mixed with betrayal was heavier. It was the kind of weight that does not crush you quickly. It is slow and cold and deliberate, and it makes you question every memory you thought was safe. Had Rio known? Had Rio been manipulated in those final days when he was most vulnerable? Had Sora stood in that hospital room, looked at his dying younger brother, and used those moments to shift the future toward what the family wanted, rather than what Rio had wanted? Kai did not go to dinner that evening. He sat on the floor of the room that had been his and Rio's, and he pressed his back against the wall, and for the first time in weeks, he cried again. Not the gentle, quiet crying of someone who misses a person, the ugly, broken crying of someone who has just discovered that a wound they thought they understood is much deeper than they knew. When he was finished, he wiped his face. He breathed. He thought carefully. He was not going to run. Running was what the family expected, what Sora probably expected. They expected Kai to break, to fall apart, to sign over the estate and go back to his small life and his second-hand books and disappear quietly. He was not going to do that. Rio loved him. Whatever had been done to that will, Kai knew what Rio truly wanted, and Kai was going to honor that. He was going to stay. He was going to find out exactly what had happened, and he was going to make sure that Rio's real wishes were the ones that came true in the end. He did not know yet that making that decision would mean spending a great deal more time looking into the cold, unreadable eyes of Sora Hashimoto, and those eyes were not entirely what they seemed. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I would not even reach 1,000 subscribers, but I believe that stories like this one deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these stories matter. Like, subscribe, and share this with someone who loves a good story.
Kai did not confront Sora right away. He was not the kind of person who charged into things. He was the kind of person who watched, who waited, who gathered, much like he did with his illustrations, spending long stretches of time studying a shape before he decided how to draw it. He started by going back to the lawyers himself, alone, asking questions carefully, framing them as a grieving spouse trying to understand what his late husband had wanted. He was polite. He was calm. He took notes. And slowly something began to come together that he had not entirely expected. The picture that formed was not quite the one he had drawn in his mind the night he found those papers. Yes, Sora had been involved in the meetings with the family lawyers. Yes, his signature was on correspondence about the will, but there was something else, a second layer of documents that Kai found only because one of the younger estate lawyers, a woman named Mitsuki, who had genuinely cared for Rio, quietly pointed him toward a file she thought he deserved to see. In those documents, Sora had not been arranging things against Rio. He had been trying to stop the rest of the family from doing something far worse. The Hashimoto family council, the aunts, the uncles, the older generation who ran the family like a company, had originally wanted to contest the will entirely. They had wanted to push Kai out with nothing. They had not wanted an outsider, someone with no family name and no bloodline, to inherit any part of their legacy.
They had been prepared to fight that battle publicly, loudly, and without mercy. Sora had stood in the middle of that battle and made them a deal. The Bloodline clause, the arrangement of living together, the structured conditions that looked from the outside like control, but from the inside were something else entirely. They were the minimum Sora had been able to negotiate, the least worst version of a situation that had been heading somewhere far uglier. He had not been protecting the family from Kai. He had been protecting Kai from the family. Kai sat with this for a long time. He did not know what to do with it. He had already built a careful structure of feelings around Sora, a structure made of cold stone, of distance and distrust. And now someone had come along and quietly removed one of the most important stones, and the whole thing was wobbling. It was around this same time that Sora began to change, or rather that Kai began to notice things about Sora that he had not let himself see before. The first thing was small. Kai had left one of his illustration projects on the dining table, a spread of watercolor sketches for a children's book, soft colors, gentle lines. He had gone to make tea and come back to find Sora standing over them, not touching, just looking. And when Sora realized Kai was in the doorway, he did not pull back or act disinterested. He simply said, in that quiet, even voice of his, "These are very good." Kai had not known what to do with that either. The second thing was less small. It happened on a rainy Thursday evening when Kai came home from a meeting to find that dinner had been made. Not by the staff, they had the evening off. By Sora. 2 bowls of plain rice congee with egg and green onion, set out on the table, still warm. Sora had already sat down and was reading, apparently done with the whole matter. "You look tired this morning. Congee is easy on the stomach." Kai stared at the bowl. Something about it cracked a small, careful piece off the wall he had been building. It was Rio's favorite," Kai said softly. A pause. Sora turned a page. "I know," he said. They ate in silence, but it was a different silence than before. It was less like the quiet of 2 people who had nothing to say, and more like the quiet of 2 people who had too much to say and were not yet sure how. Over the following weeks, things continued to shift. Sora began to talk a little more at meals, not about anything important at first, just observations, dry and brief and sometimes accidentally funny in a way that Sora himself did not seem to notice. Kai started to find himself listening for those moments, looking forward to them even, in the same cautious way a person reaches towards something hot to see if it will burn. There was also the matter of the conversation they finally had about the will. It happened late one evening in the library. Kai had decided he was done waiting. He set down his tea, looked at Sora across the room, and simply said, "I know what you did, with the family and with the original will." Sora closed his book slowly. He set it on his knee. For a long moment he said nothing, and Kai held his breath, not entirely sure what he expected. "Then you know that I didn't have good options," Sora said at last. "I know, but you could have told me." Another silence, longer this time. "Yes," Sora said, and his voice had something in it that Kai had not heard before, something softer, almost worn. "Why didn't you?" Sora looked down at the cover of his book. "Because you were grieving, because you were barely holding together, and because—" He paused again, the kind of pause that holds a great deal more than whatever comes after it. "Because I did not know how to say it. I have never been very good at saying things that matter." Kai thought about Rio, who had always known how to say things that mattered, who had teased Kai for being the quiet one. He wondered for the first time what it had been like for Sora growing up beside a brother who found words so easily, when Sora himself could not seem to find them at all. "We're the same," Kai said, mostly to himself. Sora looked at him. Something moved in those cool, dark eyes, quick like a fish turning beneath still water. "Perhaps," he said. It was not a confession, it was not an apology, it was not even close to the beginning of anything Kai could have named, but it was real, and in a house that had felt very unreal since the day Rio died, real was something.
Spring came to the estate slowly, the way it does in old places. First in the corners of the garden, then in the smell of the air, then finally in long golden light that came through the tall windows in the late afternoon and made everything look a little warmer than it actually was. Kai had been living in the Hashimoto estate for 4 months now. He had started to know its sounds, the particular creak of the third stair, the way the library door needed to be lifted slightly when you pushed it, the hour in the early morning when the birds in the back garden were loudest. He had started to know the house the way you know something you have stopped being afraid of. He had also started to know Sora. Not fully, not easily. Sora was not a person who gave himself over to knowing quickly. He was careful in the way that people are careful when they have been burned before. Not dramatically burned, not in a way they would tell you about, but burned slowly and quietly over a long time, until careful became simply how they moved through the world. Kai understood that kind of careful. He recognized it. What had grown between them over these months was not something either of them had planned. It was not something they had spoken about directly, not yet. It was more like something that had appeared in the space between them while they were both looking elsewhere, present and quiet and certain, the way certain things are certain before you have words for them. It was in the way Sora had started leaving Kai's favorite tea out in the mornings without being asked, in the way Kai had started to knock on the library door, not to say anything important, but just to sit in the same room, in the way Sora had started explaining, slowly and in pieces, all the things he had not said those first few weeks, about the family, about the will, about the years he had spent managing the expectations of people who cared more about names and legacies than about the people who had to carry them. Rio was never supposed to be the one who suffered for it, Sora said one evening. They were sitting in the garden, which Kai had started tending, not because anyone had asked him to, but because Rio had loved it, and it was something to do with his hands. He was always too good, too open. The family never knew what to do with someone who just loved things without making sure they were worth something first. "Is that what they thought was wrong with him?" Kai asked. "That's what they thought was wrong with both of you." Sora was quiet for a moment. "They thought you were wrong for him, an outsider who wasn't ambitious enough, not sharp enough, didn't have the right kind of drive." His voice did not change, but something behind it did. "They were wrong. You were the only person who ever made Rio completely happy. I could see that, even when I was too far away to say so." Kai looked at him. "You were watching?" "I was always watching. That's what I do. I don't know how to do it any other way." It was the closest Sora had come to telling Kai something true and raw and unpolished, and Kai, who had learned by now to receive Sora's words carefully, held it with both hands. The matter of the family was not finished. Kai had gone back to the lawyers, this time with Mitsuki and with documentation, and a formal challenge had been filed regarding the circumstances of the will's alteration. It was a long process. It would not be resolved quickly, but it was in motion, and the family council, who had expected Kai to fold and vanish, had clearly not expected him to be the kind of person who, once he decided to stand still, was very difficult to move. Sora had not opposed the challenge. He had, quietly and without announcing it, provided additional documentation that supported Kai's case. He had also, in a meeting with the family council that Kai only learned about afterward, told the assembled aunts and uncles and older cousins that if they continued to pressure Kai, they would find that Sora himself was no longer interested in being useful to them. He had not told Kai he was going to do this. When Kai found out, he knocked on the library door that evening and stood in the doorway until Sora looked up. "You didn't have to do that," Kai said. "I know," Sora said. "You know they're going to be angry." "They are often angry. It has rarely stopped anything important from happening." Kai stood there a moment longer. Then he said very simply, "Thank you, Sora." It was the first time he had used Sora's name like that, not formally, not with any particular weight, just plainly, the way you use a name when a person has become real to you. Sora looked at him for a moment. Something in that still, careful face was slightly different, not softer exactly, but warmer, the way stone looks when the sun hits it. "You don't need to thank me," Sora said. "I should have done more earlier. That is not a debt you owe, it's one I'm paying." "I don't think you owe me anything," Kai said. "I think," Sora said slowly, "that we may disagree about that." He paused. Then, "Kai, sit down." Kai sat. And Sora, who had spent 30 years finding words difficult, spent the next hour finding them anyway. He told Kai things he had not said out loud before, about Rio, about watching his brother love Kai and being glad for it, even when he had been too distant to show it, about the family and the weight of being the older son who was expected to hold everything in place, about the way he had moved through his life, keeping everything managed and contained and correct, and how living in this house these past months had felt unexpectedly like setting something heavy down. Kai listened. That's what he did best. When Sora was finished, the room was quiet again. But it was Rio's kind of quiet now, comfortable, full, the kind that two people make together when they already understand each other. "I don't know what this is," Kai said, gesturing at the space between them. "I don't have a word for it yet." "Neither do I," Sora said, "but I find I'm not in a hurry." Kai smiled. It was a small smile, careful and real. Rio always said patience was your best quality. Something passed through Sora's face, grief, brief and genuine. He was generous. He was right, Kai said. They stayed in the library a long time after that. Outside, the spring evening light went slowly from gold to pink to the soft gray-blue of a good night. The garden rustled gently. Somewhere in the house, a clock kept its steady sound. Kai thought about Rio. He would always think about Rio. But now when he thought about him, it was less like looking at a closed door and more like looking at a window. The person was not there, but the light they let in still was. He thought about what Rio had said in those last quiet weeks. "Be good to yourself, Kai, even when people come along who don't deserve your kindness. Be good to yourself anyway." Perhaps Rio had not been warning him about Sora at all. Perhaps Rio had simply known that the road ahead would be strange and hard and ask more of him than he expected, and that at the end of it, if Kai kept his heart open and his eyes clear, he would find his way to something worth finding. He was not all the way there yet. There was still the legal challenge, still the family, still two people in a house learning to know each other without a map. But for the first time since that morning when the sun came out at a funeral and didn't seem to know what it had lost, Kai felt something in his chest that was not only grief. It was small and careful and new. It was the very beginning of something, and that, for now, was exactly enough. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like, drop a comment with your favorite moment, and subscribe so you never miss a new story. Every single subscriber helps these stories reach someone who needs them, someone who is healing, someone who is hurting, or someone who simply loves a good love story. Share this video with a friend who would appreciate it. Your support means more than you know, and the next chapter of this journey begins with you. Come back for more stories of love, healing, and the unexpected places that warmth finds us.